Thank you all for being here this late in the day and hanging in at this point. I'd like to start off by first having our panel introduce themselves, just give a brief description of what they do, and then we'll get started here. And we'll have some room for questions from you in the end, as well as we may have some questions for you as well as along the way too. Cessie?
Director of Public Relations at Palace Resorts. I specialize in travel and tourism, hospitality, and public relations. I have a lot of experience working with destinations, hotels, airlines, online tour operators, and crisis management.
Hi, I'm Peter Land. I'm a partner at a communications firm called Finsbury. We're in Columbus Circle. We have about 100 folks in the New York office. We're a global firm, and I oversee several clients in our crisis practice.
I'm John Shea. I head up internal communications for Amtrak, heavily involved in crisis communication. I have a broad mix of internal and external experience. I've done a lot of time with automotive companies like General Motors and Delphi, and also Owens Corning.
You've done time?
That's right.
We have our first crisis.
And, and I am Richard Huff. I work at CBS News, where I handle PR for 48 hours and Sunday morning, so a little murder and a little art. It's a perfect match. So what I'd like to do is start out, since we're talking about crisis stuff, is go down the line here. And what is a crisis? What elevates in this era of everything being breaking news? What is a real crisis? Cessie, you want to start and how you define it?
I think a crisis, depending on the brand that we're talking about or the company that you're working at, is any kind of news that comes out, a situation that takes place, or something that happens that affects your brand in a negative way, whether it's the way people conceive you or it impacts sales in a negative way. So that, at least from a travel and tourism standpoint.
Okay.
I mean, fairly similar. I mean, I think we kind of categorize it as issues in crisis. Issues in crisis management is kind of how we approach the topic. And there are certain things that are issues that don't quite elevate up to a crisis, and there are other things that are clearly a crisis. And I think it's a major reputational hit, major damage. It could be sales. It could be a significant leadership issue with a CEO or somebody who's in serious trouble. Probably I would say most of what we do is more issues management, and then obviously when that elevates up and it's truly a crisis, it kind of takes on a whole different feel.
And at Amtrak, it'd be very similar. Crisis for us would be on one of three dimensions. One would be impacting our operations in a significant way. Another would be reputation, something that's happened that would cause people to think ill of Amtrak, or financial performance, something that's negatively impacting us financially.
Great. John, let's start with you. Is there a yardstick that you use internally for measuring the severity of a crisis and how you react from that?
Yeah, our emergency management team, we basically have 4 levels of what we would define as a crisis. Level 1 is the most basic level of the operations are impacted, maybe in a way that customers wouldn't notice. Level 2 would be it's definitely impacted and you're going to notice it. Level 3 is that there's a major, type of derailment event, but no fatalities. And level 4 is there's a fatality. So depending on the level of crisis, different people get engaged. And
Level 4 is where you really start swearing?
Yes, that's where you're right. Exactly.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, we're an agency, right? So if a client says it's a crisis for the most part. But sometimes our job is to actually tell them, it's actually not. You might think it's a crisis, but actually it's not. It's manageable, and here's how we can deal with it. So again, I think you can kind of just assess based on whatever that might be. I'm trying to think of a good example. When I worked at PepsiCo, as an example, Gatorade is one of our brands. And we had Tiger Woods as an endorser of the product, right? So when he had, what happened to him, earlier, for him it was a crisis, right? But for us it was an issue because it affected our brand. It wasn't a crisis for Gatorade, because it wasn't going to have massive impact on our brand sales, but it was an issue and we had to deal with it. So again, for him personally, obviously, it was a crisis moment and he had to deal with it as a true crisis. But so I think you kind of have to navigate, that same kind of continuum of there are issues, and then as soon as they start to feel like, okay, this is front page material, and then we kind of assess it that way.
I think for us, a crisis can be, it could be something that specifically happens at the hotel. or it could be a destination issue. And I'm sure anybody here that reads the news today knows that Cancun and Mexico have a really bad image right now when it comes to traveling. A lot of Americans are weary of traveling there because of the news that they hear that it's not safe, whether it's drug cartels and so sometimes we have situations where the United States will issue a travel alert and people will start panicking. The media will start writing stories about how it's not safe to go to Cancun, even though it's situational, it's affecting the destination, but it's affecting us. So for us, from a crisis standpoint, we manage that by, reassuring guests that why it's safe to come to our hotel. And sometimes it's just giving them statistics, like really whatever happened this many miles away. You probably were right next to a murder in New York City before you would actually experience any kind of negativity at our hotels. But it's kind of just like explaining that to them and kind of rationalizing versus what the media is putting out there.
How aggressive can you get in those positions, though? When you have, we were talking earlier, and we get sometimes headlines go crazy, and a whole region is labeled bad for Americans to go or anybody to go. And how aggressive can you get in defending your properties in those scenarios?
It's a tough situation because it's a destination issue, and most of the time the government itself, the local tourism board, they'll release a statement talking about the safety of the destination. But for us, all we can really talk about is how our hotels are safe, the precautions that we do to ensure that the safety of our guests are our top priority. So you can defend it until you can't really defend it, because there comes a point where it's a destination issue and it's government, and for us, we can only get involved to a certain extent and talk about what we do to keep our guests safe.
I mean, I think that the obvious rise of digital news, has changed the way all of us have to approach. I mean, back in the day, you'd wait for the newspaper to come out the next morning, right? Or maybe it's on the nightly news at 6 o'clock. Now it's immediate, right? So there's the bad news of that is it's immediate, and you have to be on your feet, totally ready to go 24/7. The little bit of good news in that is that if there is a wrong headline, or if the lead is wrong, or if there's genuinely factually incorrect information, we have no problem getting on the phone and calling the reporter and saying, your headline's wrong. Your lead is you have bad information. It's not true. It's misleading. There's no context. So to the extent that you can push back, we do it immediately. As soon as we see something that's not right, I have no problem getting on the phone and saying, hey, you screwed up and you got to fix it.
How about in the sense of, since we're talking about playbooks, do you have crisis playbooks, and what do they look like?
I didn't bring it with me. It's huge. No, you can have a playbook. Again, on an agency side, we have multiple clients, so different clients might have different playbooks. I'm trying to think of an example I can actually talk about, because clients don't really want to know people know they're having a crisis. But in a general sense, I'll give you a decent example. So we represent Toyota, and we've been representing them since the brake recall of 2007 or 2008, I believe. And they're also an Olympic sponsor, right? So we have developed a playbook for that. That's me, sorry. Probably Toyota, wanting to know why am I talking about them in public? No,
We just saw a tweet.
Sorry, I promise I'll be over soon. So we've developed a crisis preparedness. It is fairly large, about the Olympics, right? Because what could possibly go wrong at the Olympics if you're a car company? Like 8,000 things could go wrong, right? So whether it's a transportation issue, it could be an athlete that they sponsored who, is caught doing something like, Ryan Lochte or something like that. So our job is to think through, if you are Toyota at the Olympic Games in Japan or in Korea, where they were, what in Korea was a great example. It was right around, when North Korea was becoming kind of more newsy for a few reasons, and we had executives going not too far from the DMZ, right? So that never thought that would have to go in the Olympic playbook, but it did, right? So episodically you try to figure out what are all the possible things that could go wrong, and you develop scenario planning for each one of those things, and you're not always going to get it right, because there's going to be inevitably something that you didn't foresee. You do the best you can and try to have responses ready to go, and if you're really, really good and thorough, you probably have like maybe 90% of everything covered that could happen.
John, how about at Amtrak?
Yeah, I mean, I very much what you say resonates with us. At Amtrak, we do have a crisis communication playbook. It used to be about 80 pages long, and now we got it down to 40 pages, and we kind of test it and refine it and talk about it as a team. And one of the things I'm working on is to try to simplify it even further. The crisis communication playbook right now is written in a lot of legalese, a lot of long sentences. I'm trying to break it down to 3 to 5 words per step. Write a statement. Make sure we're not promoting, fare sales, on our website when there's a derailment event happening, things like that. So, and we practice that a lot, So I think another athlete, I think Mike Tyson said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, and I think that's crisis communication, You can have the best plan laid out, but when you're in the middle of a crisis, you instinctively have to just kind of go. And so practice really helps on that.
What does that practice look like? How do you carry that out?
You bring together a cross-functional team of people. So you bring together the emergency management team, the Amtrak Police Department, engineering, transportation, and you go through a crisis event, and you kind of go through in real time how you would, the steps that everyone would take to do that, and you kind of have debriefs as you go along. So I think it's important to do that pretty frequently, 2 to 3 times a year at least.
So you're doing like a tabletop
Tabletop
disaster.
exercise, yeah.
Yeah, no, we did the same thing at PepsiCo, and I think it's slightly different because it was a publicly traded company, as we were talking about before. So we would actually do the exact same thing. We would get a room of about 50 or 60 people, probably twice a year, and we would simulate something going wrong. And we had investor relations, government affairs, consumer relations, communications, marketing, the office of the CEO, and we literally did an exact, I can remember one, 20 kids at a state fair, got food poisoning from, potato chips, from Lay's potato chips and Mountain Dew or something. And then the tweet just came across at 7:30 on CNBC, go. And then one of the great things about doing those types of exercises is you actually see people on your teams who actually are really calm and good in a crisis. And sometimes we actually would put them on camera, and we'd be able to tell, okay, this person does a really good job on camera, so if we ever needed to put somebody on camera, he or she might be the best person to do it. So we do the exact, it's really important to practice, and as part of the whole preparedness to identify who in the organization. And a lot of times, again, you forget, oh, geez, I forgot to call the investor relations guy. It's going to, because he just, it's going to affect the stock potentially if, people are sick because they ate, so you have to kind of figure out which stakeholders, need to know, when do they need to know, when do you tell the CEO, and so forth. So we would practice that a lot.
Cessie, how has your playbook changed over the years?
I think, we're much more attentive to social media. I mean, a couple of years ago, it would be, draft a statement. I mean, for us, it's a different scenario depending on what happened. If it's a destination issue, something happened, a couple miles away and where we need to react, we reach out first to government officials, get an official police report, kind of get facts to draft a statement on behalf of the brand. When it's a destination issue, we kind of try to stay out of it as much as possible. But I think that, whenever we have a crisis now, the first thing we do is activate social team. Guys, keep your eyes on social media, because for us as a hotel company, we have guests and they're very active on social media. I've had situations where if there was, a killing in Cancun, and, I'll have a guest post that article on our Facebook page and say, I'm coming here next week. Is your hotel safe? Is it still safe to go? And so it's not so much anymore just managing media responses, but also managing guest expectation and their experiences when they go to social with situations like that.
You realize no one's going to Cancun in this crowd.
Listen, our hotels are always at 90% occupancy.
If you haven't booked your tickets yet, you can get really good
Cancun
deals.
is safe, I swear. I go there all the time. I'm still alive, guys.
You have plans to go.
Peter, you've handled a bunch of these kinds of things over your career. One of them was the Duke lacrosse scandal scenario that was
Scandal?
I'm thinking of my tabloid headlines. But I mean, that was 2006. How would your playbook be different today, looking forward, than what you did then?
I would say some of the basic principles would stay the same, but the tactics would be very different, right? So for those of you who don't remember the Duke lacrosse case, does anybody not know the Duke lacrosse case? It's such a pretty widely known. We'll get together afterwards so I can explain it to you. No, but basically it was Duke lacrosse players were accused of assaulting a woman at a party off campus, right? And it was the perfect recipe for a great story for the media, okay? It was white lacrosse players, African-American dancer. It was rich, poor, town gown, north, south. If you could have created written a book of what would make the best made-for-TV movie about a college sports scandal, this would have been it. And so fascinating is that a university, so it's an interesting story because I've done dozens of crisis programs, but this was the most interesting because universities are very atypical in that for a couple reasons. One, there's essentially no security, right? So there's nothing stopping cameras from going on campus. Crews, Good Morning America shows up on campus and interviews students, and there's no mechanism to stop that from happening. When I was at PepsiCo, if somebody wanted to talk to our CEO, they couldn't get past security, right? It was pretty simple. If there's a problem, we just lock the door and that's it. No reporters can come in. But in university environments, so for those of you who've been down to Duke, there's like 100 arteries, into the various parts of the campus. So there was no way to stop the media from showing up and just randomly picking off students and saying, hey, what do you think about the Duke lacrosse case? And then it's on the Today Show. And there's no way to control it. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is universities are bastions of intellectual freedom and thought. So again, if you look at a typical corporation, the CEO can tell the rest of the employees, nobody's talking to the media about this issue. I'm the only one who's authorized, or communications is going to run the play, but that's it. But the university president couldn't tell the professors, the tenured professors, hey, do me a favor, don't talk to 60 Minutes. They're coming to campus. We'd really, can you say this? Because the university president would get fired for telling a tenured professor what to do and say. So a lot of the kind of problems inherent in a university crisis are still the same. All of those things would still happen. The difference is there was no social media at the time. So we were able to manage the flow a little bit more easily of when things were going to happen. I also think we would have been able to use social media as a way to communicate with the student body, the employees of the university, because Duke was the biggest employee of the city of Durham, so they wanted to make sure to communicate to the employees, to the people who live in the town, and we didn't have any of those tactics available, so I think there would have been a lot more open and transparent communication. They tried to do it, but there weren't the vehicles to do it. Emails, you could email alumni. That was about it. There weren't the same tools that you'd have today to communicate to multiple stakeholders, and there were a lot to communicate with.
Well, in that case, too, would your social media have been able to help control some of the media stuff, at least tell them where to go and direct them and that sort of thing?
I think in the very beginning it was it was genuinely an uncontrollable situation because the university also didn't have any media guidelines until we got to campus, and they'd hired us to help them with that. So a TV truck could literally just show up and pull right up to the Duke Chapel, and the chapel's behind, and the chyron says, rape on campus. How do you stop that from happening? You can't actually stop that from happening, except you could tell the security guards at the traffic cones, can you just maybe set up 100 yards down a little bit so it's a little bit harder for them to get to the campus? But there really wasn't a whole lot, in the beginning there was very little you could do to stop.
John, what percentage, if you're suggesting somebody put a playbook together today, how much of that should be social, how much traditional media, and how much something else?
I would say a lot of it is social. I mean, it really has transformed the way, you manage through a crisis here in the last, 5 to 10 years for sure. I think, at Amtrak, we're actually building up our social media team. That's one thing that we're doing to be able to better respond to crisis events and to promote our brand. So, again, we have customers on trains who will tweet out photos of a derailment event, and that will be out to the press before we can even catch our breath and figure out what to do next. So it's critical to be able to monitor what's being said and to be able to respond in real time, and then to have messages ready to go so that as soon as something like that happens, we can try to get our message out first.
So when you say you're building up your team, how many people will that team be for then the next incident? Not saying you're going to have an incident, of course.
Right. No, it's going to go up by, 3 to 4-fold. It's going to be, Amtrak runs very lean, so we try to be very responsible with, the federal dollars that we get. But clearly social media is something that we need to invest in for a better customer experience and to better protect our brand. So.
Now, we've talked a little bit about having some pre-planned messages. What's the wackiest thing you've come up with in your what-if meetings? Peter, you mentioned the Olympics or Cessie or anything like, what if this happens? What do you plan for?
I mean,
Aliens attacking or?
I feel like for us, I mean, we've literally had every what if that could happen. I mean, we've had people, unfortunately die at the resort. We've had electrocutions. We've had, you name it, and we've had it. So I think now social is definitely the way that we have to go first. A couple of months ago, we did have a situation where we had an electrical problem in the pool, and someone did get electrocuted. And just like he said, it made it to social first before the operations team, even let us know that there was an electrocution. So, our social media concierges for us are super important. We have social media concierges on every single hotel because they're on the ground. So they're more quick to respond, and social for sure is.
I mean, I think the new what if is, frankly, a little bit tied to the administration, right? I'm trying to think how I say this. But it's true. So I would say up until 2 years ago or so, you didn't really consider a lot of what ifs in social media that your company might get tweeted about, right? That's a relatively new phenomenon. I think we could probably all relatively 3 or 4 years ago, that wouldn't have been in the playbook. What if somebody in the administration just arbitrarily chooses to say something negative about my company today?
Correct.
I don't think we would have thought about it. But now, frankly, for all of our clients, we basically have a plan, on the off chance, that someone in Washington says something about our brand that isn't positive. So I think most companies actually have kind of put that into their. I would guess most companies have that in their playbook.
In our
How
case,
aggressive?
luckily, he doesn't like to go to. He likes to stick to his.
Who are you talking about? I was being very.
Mar-a-Lago, so he doesn't go to Cancun, so we're good.
But how aggressive can you be in that approach, given the way social media is being used by some folks in Washington? How aggressive can Toyota, just to pick one of your companies?
No. It's a great question.
Come
I
out
don't
and
have a
say-
great answer because I'm going to say it depends, right?
Right.
Which is like the lame PR answer to
Right.
everything. I'm so sorry I have to say that, but no. But it does depend, right?
What they say, correct.
Yeah. I have told clients probably. I think I've probably told 5 clients in the last 2 years, ignore it. It will go away. It's not an issue. Just leave it alone. If you comment on it, it's going to give it more fuel to the fire. It's garbage. It has 8 hours of shelf life, and if you enter into the discussion, you're just going to make it worse. I have other clients who I've said, this is actually an opportunity, to say something. So I'll give you the quick example because this is relatively public. One of the first things that was tweeted after the inauguration was Toyota was building a plant in Mexico, and the president didn't think that was a great idea. So I think it was something like huge tariffs, bad idea. All caps. A couple of typos. Anyway, so we knew it was coming. We had 100% prepared for it. We knew it was just it was probably going to happen. So we were ready to go. Now the actual way good news that came out of that was it allows for Toyota to actually tell the story of their investment in America, right? So they have 100,000 employees. They've been in this country for 40 years. Things that most people, a lot of people think that Toyota is an American company, because they have so many plants and so many factory workers. So in a way, even though nobody likes to see a negative tweet, in some respects, we were able to kind of turn it a little bit. And some journalists were calling and saying, hey, what do you think? And we said, well, actually, we've been in America for 40 years. We have this many employees, and the reporters would never have asked us about Toyota's investment in America. So in some every once in a while we were prepared for it, and we kind of knew that we could flip it. But again, for every one of those, there were probably 3 or 4 where we just said let it go.
Well, you mentioned reporters in that case. We're focused a lot on
Reporters.
I know a few. Do you need them now for a crisis? What role do reporters play in you getting your crisis messages out?
I mean, you don't have a choice. If it's a crisis, you don't have a choice, right? Reporters are going to report on it, so I think you have to, you right? I think at some level you can't disintermediate, the New York Times. I mean, if they're going to write about your client, if they're going to write about your brand, you need to be engaged. Then that being said, you can do both, right? I mean, I think you have the playbook that says, here's how you're going to have to engage with media. However, now we can go direct to consumers. We have a database of people who've already opted in to get social media posts about the brand, so you can go direct, which you didn't have that option before. Media almost had to be the conduit. So I don't think you can buy. I mean, again, it depends, but I think for the most part, you have to do both.
I mean, it's an opportunity for us to tell our story. We need more than 140 characters to explain what we're doing to make Amtrak safer for everyone. So, I mean, working with reporters, getting our story out, it's really important.
John, you've had to deal with some crises that have had death of passengers involved. How do you balance having an empathetic or message that you put out in those crisis moments and protect the company as well? Where's the line in those things?
I mean, it starts with empathy. I mean, anytime there's some type of fatality, I mean, our focus is on the human element of it, expressing those condolences. I mean, at first we make sure that, from a chain of notification, the families are notified, and then the employees, get a message, and then we go external with that. But it's the empathy first, but then a reassuring secondary message if this is what we're doing to make sure that our operations remain safe, or it's a focus on that rather than everything's running fine now, don't worry about it type of thing.
Cessie, what challenges do you face in getting executive buy-in to the need for for this kind of playbook and crisis plan?
We were talking about this earlier versus, a publicly traded company versus a private company, which, we are a private company. And so, our executives really, if it's a destination issue, they're pretty adamant on the fact that they don't want to respond. They just think it's not in our place to respond. And, obviously the PR person, me, always going in there and saying, no, we need to explain why it's safe to come, why it's still safe to come, what we do differently. A lot of the times they like to, ignore it because eventually it'll go away. And I think that it really just does depend on the situation. If it's something that happened within our resort, on our property, then we do have to address it and we have to state the facts. If it's something that is a tragedy that happened, then, empathy and explain. People just want to understand. They want to know the facts. They feel more comfortable when they have information. And what we do to make sure that when they do come, that they're safe. So I think it's a battle between responding versus not responding almost all the time.
And lawyers must get involved at some point,
I cannot put together a statement with our attorneys, reviewing it and saying, absolutely not, you cannot say that. Sometimes it's an ongoing investigation, and sometimes it could hinder the investigation if we actually were to put something out before something's been determined.
So from our end, we actually use that to our advantage sometimes. If there's an ongoing investigation, we can't say anything externally. We know that anything we produce internally will be leaked. So we can provide a little more detail on here's what we believe happened and here's what we're doing to fix the problem. And then magically it gets leaked.
It turns up in the newspaper
right.
somehow.
So
Are there any lawyers here? No, I'm serious, because I think this is a really delicate balance that we have to have with the legal teams, and frankly, most of our referrals come from outside law firms and so forth, so they're our best friends for the most part. But I think sometimes the empathy piece gets a little bit lost in legalese, right? So I think that our job as communicators, because I think we're a little bit closer to the consumer, we're closer to the action, we're closer to the media, and even though the legal response might be legally appropriate, it's not empathetically appropriate, right? So United Airlines is a perfect example of that, right? I mean, the first comment was legally, I guess, okay. But anybody in this room who's in communications, anybody on this, probably saw that and said, oh my God, the lawyers must have written that, because it didn't feel like it was a total human emotional response to what the video was. The video was a very emotional video. A guy's getting dragged off and he's bleeding, right? And I think our job, is to try to kind of work with the legal team, say, okay, what can we do so we're all okay here, because we understand there might be some liability, but let's talk about what the actual consumers are going to expect from our CEO, and or from a different spokesperson, where is the empathy? How do we kind of show a little bit of humanity while at the same time not being exposed. And I think for communicators, as opposed to the lawyers, that's why they tend to work really well together, and they have a lot of the same discipline and same intent, but every once in a while you have to, I don't know, overrule is not the right word, but you have to kind of explain, why the legal answer isn't necessarily the right way to go.
Sometimes liability gets in the way of I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so.
But by contrast, the Southwest Airlines CEO, when that passenger got sucked out of the door or window, and the CEO had a message on video up, I don't know, was it within the hour, or it was very quick, but it was a beautiful message, very empathetic, the total opposite of what happened with United.
So we want to open it up. We've got about 5 more minutes, I guess, here to the audience. If you have some questions for the panel here, go ahead. Yeah, you. You first, and then we'll come up front here.
My experience is somewhat limited, but from that experience, I would ask you guys this. What about getting the facts in your particular crisis? I know that also has to do with lawyers, and also you share that in common with lawyers, trying to ascertain what you can really work with in terms of what actually happened. And I'm sure you all have had, a variety of experiences that way. But isn't that the first step?
So for us, I mean, if it's something that, we do get the facts right away first, I'll reach out to our operations team and we'll get, a full report of exactly what happened. And then depending on what that report has, if it is something that's going to implicate us, then that's where the battle goes with the attorneys versus drafting. Sometimes it'll be something very vague, it was, a tragic situation. We're so sorry, empathetic. We send our, our thoughts and prayers are with the family. It's an ongoing investigation. But for the most part, I mean, yeah, you have to get the facts. If it's a destination issue, we automatically go to the local government officials. We wait for an official police report to come out. We gather the details, and then kind of based on that, we always let the destination take the lead, right? Because in situations like that, like local governments always take precedence. We let them take the lead based on whatever messaging they put out. We'll kind of piggyback off of whatever they're saying, and then, talk about what we do as a brand to ensure safety.
Exactly, same at Amtrak. An initial message will go out right away saying we're aware of the situation, we're looking into it, working with local authorities, we'll get you more details soon. And then we let the local authorities take the lead, and they disclose whatever facts, or the NTSB. Usually it's the local authorities, and then we repeat that to internal audiences.
Yeah, I mean the same. I mean, I think that unfortunately, because of the speed and velocity of media today, you can't always get the facts before the media expects a response. Right, so I think that's the dance that we play with the journalists, right? What happened? Tell me what happened. We're going with the story in 15 minutes because this is what we've heard. And we would all say, okay, but we haven't heard the same thing. If you could wait a little bit, we'll actually get you the information. But Business Insider's competing with the Wall Street Journal, who's competing with Market Watch, who's competing with so that everybody wants to be first. So some are willing to actually I'm not going to wait for you. Thank you. I so appreciate what you just said to me. However, we're going with what we think to be true because we've heard it from multiple sources, right? So that's what we kind of have to wrestle with because we don't always have the facts, and we try to be super collaborative and respectful of the media's desire to get stuff out in timely fashion, but at the same time waiting if possible. So that's why that kind of standby statement, which is, hey, we don't have all the details yet. We're working as fast as we can, as soon as we have something, and sometimes people will wait, and other times we just, I've definitely worked with reporters who, if we have it 90% right the first time out, that's okay, and I'll make a correction, an hour later when you get me the facts. I don't think that's great, policy, but that's kind of what happens a lot.
By the way, here's the link to my story. We'll fix it on the way.
Right.
I had a
And then nobody
situation-
reads the second story, right?
That's right.
I had a situation like that, similar, where they, obviously the media just wanted to, be the first ones out with the story. It was an issue with a destination issue. The Associated Press put out, this is where fake news comes in. They put out a story. The headline was, 4 dead bodies in the resort city of Cancun with a beautiful picture of gorgeous turquoise beaches. But when you get to the 3rd paragraph, it says, the incidents did not take place in the tourist areas. Well, and why did you lead with that headline and that? Because they didn't wait to get official information. They kind of just went with whatever they needed to go to get the story out. And that's the panic that, people read that, you're scrolling through your Facebook feed and you're like, oh my God, 4 dead bodies in Cancun, I'm going next week. And that's what we battled.
We had a young lady had a question here.
And so despite the fact that it's well known that news travels fast now, and I guess this question is more so for Peter, do you still have clients who
It's a great question. That does actually happen. Exactly what you just said does happen. But I think most communications executives inside of big companies are very familiar with the speed of news, right? So if they have a good relationship with their CEO and their general counsel, we can say, hey, we need to move fast on this, and then it's up to them to go to their internal stakeholders and say, we have 15 minutes. Like, I know you want more time, but this is about to become a big deal, and you need to move really fast. So I think when we tell clients, like, you're going to need to move very, very fast here, they're usually pretty good about it. Every once in a while, you know, there's a holdup, but I would say by and large they can move pretty fast. If they know it's going to be a problem, and we can convince them that it's going to be a problem, you need to move, they're pretty good at moving.
What data do you have that comes into play there? Are you able to show someone that?
Absolutely nothing.
But,
No, I mean,
or past case examples where in this scenario it took this amount of time to fade away?
You know, I honestly, so much of it is gut and experience, right? I mean, because when it's a crisis, the data's hard, right? You know, you can't say, like, I know this is going to happen because, you know, 17% of the time. I mean, it's not really how it works. I think it's a combination of do you know the reporter, right? So that's some of the data points, right? Do you know and trust the outlet or the journalist who's actually calling you? And if it's somebody you've worked with before and they're trustworthy and they have good information, like, that's all the data points that I need, because I know that they're honest and factual and accurate. So if they say, hey, I'm calling you because I want to give you a heads up, I heard this, and you need to get back to me within half an hour. That's the data point, right? Which is, okay, you know, they wouldn't, you know, I know this, I know the outlet, I know the reporter, I know the situation. There's not a, you know, the data actually gets to the facts, right? I mean, so that's the data that you need. Okay, what exactly happened? What's the, it's again, it's a lot of times think about a law firm, right? When somebody who's accused of something walks in and tells their lawyer, you know, this is what you need to know, but I still want representation. You know, clients will come to us and say, look, you know, there's a problem. You know, we say, tell us everything, because we can't do our job unless we really know what happened. We don't want to be surprised. You're going to tell us one thing, and then 6 weeks later, we're going to find out, well, you know, we got 80% of it. So the data for us is in the information gathering on the upfront, and then I think, do we have a trusted relationship with the outlet, and do we know the reporter, and do we trust them?
There's a question over here.
Extra question. One, what are your favorite social media listening tools to identify potential crises that are going to come up? Because there's always the reporters who call and say, I have these facts, and there's one approach to that. But then what you find on social can be different and sometimes faster moving. And then two, what do you weigh in devising your strategy and responding to those things on social? Because sometimes you can create a story when there wasn't one by what people are putting out on social and add fuel to the fire that you never wanted to have to begin with.
Yeah, on social media listening tools one of the things that happened at Amtrak is social media has moved from corporate communications to marketing because it's seen as more of a branding tool. So they're currently building up that team. So I can't speak to exactly what the listening channel is. I can say from the strategic standpoint, we do look at, for example, we had a controversy where we had a GOP congressional train going from DC to West Virginia, to Greenbrier, and a garbage truck ended up in the pathway of the train, and the train hit the garbage truck. And it was a big national story. And we studied the social media metrics, and we determined that we thought it'd have a lot of legs, but it turned out the story really didn't. And so we were being pushed to have a next day press conference, and we used that data to make the case to senior management, don't have a press conference, the story's going away. And sure enough, it did. So
I think for us, for social, I mean, if it's something that needs to be addressed, we'll prepare a statement and answer it once. You know, people will ask, what happened with this situation? And we'll clarify, we'll post a statement, but we won't keep the conversation going because, like you said, it'll create a bigger story. And a lot of the times we just don't respond to certain things just because it'll continue to create. I mean, you start a conversation online, especially on a platform like Facebook, you see comments starting to troll over. I mean, it'll never die. So I think that from time to time we'll put together a statement, we'll answer the question once and for all, we'll address the situation, and then that's it. We won't continue to respond to comments.
Go ahead.
Well, the attorneys help us do that, so that's where they really clamp down
Right.
and say you can't speculate. I think, but to your point, the big thing is social media as it relates to employees. You have employees who may be close to the incident and who may want to talk about the incident on their own personal channels, and so we need to be engaged and continually kind of educating employees on how to use social media and don't speak on behalf of Amtrak and that kind of thing. So that's really a very big challenge for us. But again, in transparency, I think our leadership team is pretty committed to disclosing what they know when they can. So,
Yeah, I mean, transparency is a really tricky thing because, you know, there's no law that says you need to tell the media anything, right? So you know, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post calls, you know, the instinct is, you know, ooh, I gotta call them back. Actually, no. They're doing their job to try to obtain information. We might be doing our job to absolutely give them nothing. It might be in our best interest in that situation to say, you know what, I know why you're calling, and I'm sorry, I cannot give you information. Now one could argue that's not being transparent, but within what I'm paid to do, if I think it's in the best interests of either the company I'm working for or the client that I have to absolutely, you know, and if the reporter says, you know, Peter Land declined to comment, or, you know, I'm okay with that, I'll make that assessment that, you know what, it's not in my company's best interest to be as transparent as you know, maybe I'd want to be personally, but professionally, you know, you have to make that judgment call, and there are times when you just don't do it.
And I also feel like there's a way to kind of spin it once the news has kind of died down of that particular crisis. Like we've put up, you know, we'll wait for a situation to die down and we'll put live webcams up at the resorts. And you can go to our Facebook page, you can go to our website, and you'll see a live cam of beautiful beaches. And it's kind of like engaging, like without being in your face, like, hey, everything's fine, it's safe here. It's a little bit more subdued. And then we'll reach out to some of these reporters after and be like, hey, you know, just want to give you an update. This is what's going on. This is what we're doing now. And maybe sometimes it'll lead to a positive follow-up story after.
I think we got one more question over here.
Just to follow up with your comment, do you feel that if you don't give a comment, that will make you like shed a negative light on you or make the company look more guilty?
It's a great question. I happen to not be a fan of no, if I can try to provide a comment, I will for that exact reason, even though sometimes saying the company was unavailable for comment, there's nothing wrong with that, but the perception is if the company wasn't willing to provide something, they must be hiding something. That's not actually true, but we understand that that's the perception. And why don't you just say something? If you really have, you know, because then it's like you get trapped. You know, it's like, when did you stop beating your wife? Well, I'm not going to answer that, you know, question. That's not, you know, so I'm not going to comment on that, you know, because, you know, so you get into that, it's a slippery slope, because once you engage, you know, then you have to disengage, you know, and how do you do that in a way? So we try, if there's something to say that's credible and saleable, you know, so at least it doesn't feel like we're ducking it completely. You know, we will do that, but there are many, many times when we've just had to say, you know, hey, we're just not going to comment on that. I'm really sorry. You know, I can't talk about it.
Or we can go back to our trust and blame it on the attorneys again and
Yeah,
say it's an
that's right.
ongoing investigation. Unfortunately, we're unable to provide additional information.
Right. But the consumer, the reader, doesn't buy that. Unfortunately, we all know that the readers and of whatever, the people watching on TV, you know, if 60 Minutes is doing a thing and, you know, it's 12 minutes into the segment where they've absolutely ripped apart a company, and then we reached out to the company for comment and they declined, you know, it's like, well, of course not. You know, it's impossible sometimes. You know, where you can, sometimes we provide a written response because we don't want to engage, you know, so you might provide if it's going to be on TV, you don't want to put someone on camera, you know, a short sentence because you don't want the reader to say we reached out to the company and they chose not to comment. It makes you feel guilty even if you're not. So we actually try if we can to figure out a way to work in those parameters, but it's not easy.
Is there, before we go, one best piece of advice you'd give folks dealing in this area?
Stay calm, try to gather as much information as you can, and I think that, you know, the more you can lean on your executive team, for me has been really important just because you're the expert on crisis. You're letting them know how they should be managing a situation. So stay calm, try to gather as much facts, and come up with a couple of different recommendations. Your number one plan might not be what they want to do, and they might say, no, we're not going to do that. So I always try to come up with a couple of different scenarios and different options that we can, provide in case that they don't want to respond. What else would we do? And I think that staying calm is definitely the most important thing.
Yeah, I like that one, actually. I would have said the same thing, because the people, at least in the companies that I've worked, the rest of the organization takes their cue from you, right? So if you're head of communications and your hair's on fire and you're running around like, where's this? I need the papers here. Get me the data there. Where's the playbook? I don't know what happened to it. It's, I brought it home, but I forgot to bring it back to work. All of a sudden, the rest of the organization will pick up on that. Oh, there must be like a huge problem. He's running around and he's going crazy. And then all of a sudden, it starts to fan the flames. It might even be bigger than it is, right? So I actually think that's I would actually say the same thing. Just if especially in the communications function, there's an expectation from your CEO or from your boards that you're the one person who's going to keep it together, right? There's a lot of moving pieces and parts, and there might be debate among a lot of different groups, but the person who's the day-to-day dealing with the media, you better keep it together, because the rest of us, let us, kind of run around, but you need to stay calm and focused.
And I think to build on that point, the best way to stay calm is to know what you're doing. So practice, really be prepared. And again, I think the playbook provides a framework, but it's not going to be a step-by-step. It gives you an approach to how to engage with the crisis, but then you've got to feel your way through the particulars and the details of the event. But definitely practice on how you would manage that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that 99% of what we perceive a crisis are not really life and death scenarios. And I often refer to Blue's Clues, stop, breathe, think, and go from there. But I agree, don't lose your head. And with that, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.